All right. Hey, folks. All right. Yeah, let's get this party started. All right. Oh, wait, I need to turn my thing on. Hang on. As if, I think we'll be fine. Okay, yep, there we go. So, all right. My name's Andrew. This is Flaying, the blockchain ledger for fun, profit, and hip-hop. And that title will make a lot more sense here shortly. Before I get started, I was just notified that I have some prizes to give out for questions. But my first question, the answer to it is on my first slide. So I'm just going to go ahead and ask it now. Who can name, first and last name, the author of the Bitcoin paper? Just shout it. Man, what do I... All right. you all got it. I don't know what I was thinking. I'll figure out some other thing to do. I don't know. Damn it. I didn't really think that one through very well. And then another warning, just real quick. I don't see any young kids in here. There's like 3 or 4 slides that are going to have a little bit of profanity on it. If anybody has a problem with that, speak now or forever hold your peace. Cool. You were raising your hand? Yeah. Oh, like young people who don't want to hear profanity. Okay, let's get started. So before I even get started, I'm going to blast through this pretty quickly. I want to acknowledge a bunch of people that helped me make this talk happen. My buddy Colin, me and him did all this work together. Like we did all the research, and he was pretty much there the whole time. We were bouncing everything off of one another, and so thanks to him, thanks to my coworker Chris Donaher, who helped me with all of the SQL queries that I had to do with this, because he's a really good database guy. My coworker Richard Seymour, who helped me a lot with a lot of moral support and a lot of the lower level Bitcoin script kind of stuff. My coworker Bobby, who definitely doesn't want his name on this. My former roommate Andrew, for I'll explain at some point what he did. The guy Edward Iskandarov, who is the author of the blockchain parsing library Pi Blockchain. This guy named Sendex on YouTube, who has this amazing YouTube series on explaining the actual Bitcoin paper. He takes every single sentence and he makes like a 10-minute video out of it. It's like 5 hours, but it's totally worth it. Tom Gebhardt's the dude that wrote this really nice blockchain parsing guide. Kurt Barnard is another one of my roommates who actually gave me a really brilliant idea of how to do some big data heavy computing stuff that I needed to do. Satoshi Nakamoto for writing the Bitcoin paper, whoever you or they are. The authors of the Bitcoin developer documentation, which is exceptional. The 2 guys that got in a fight at ShmooCon 2 years ago that led to me making the worst joke of all time, and my company Endgame for just being a generally amazing company to work at and enabling me to do this research. So this is going to be the outline of the talk I'm going to give, and I'll just kind of go through it one by one. There's a Pastebin link up there if you want to write that down. That's going to have all of the links and hashes that I'm going to be referring to in the talk. So that way, because I'm going to have, if you know anything about Bitcoin, you know there's a ton of transaction IDs and wallets and basically stuff like that you guys, I'm going to have on the slides, but you guys aren't going to be able to write down in time. So go ahead and take down that Pastebin link. I just tweeted it also from my Twitter. So if you want to follow me, it's Andrew___Morris. And it's on there as well if you don't get a chance to write that down. So, my name, yes. Yep, absolutely. Yep. Okay, all right. So, all right, let's do this. My name is Andrew Morris. This is my Twitter. I work at a company called Endgame on the research and development team. My background is actually in offensive cybersecurity stuff. I was a pen tester for a while and a red teamer for a while, doing majority private sector stuff, a little bit of government work. I've been doing computer related things for the majority of my life, and somehow I'm still kind of bad at it. I dropped out of high school younger, and I didn't do any kind of schooling or anything, so I kind of have a different background of looking at things. And I really like just computers in general, playing music, and tweeting stupid jokes. Today I'm speaking on behalf of myself, not speaking on behalf of my employer. I do work for a company called Endgame. It's an amazing company, but I'm not representing them today. This is not their point of view. This is just my point of view. This is my recreational research. All they did was just let me do it. So again, this is just me. I'm just talking about things that I observed. I'm not a Bitcoin or blockchain expert, which is a silly thing to say when you are giving a talk to people on Bitcoin and blockchain. But the reason that I'm saying that is because Bitcoin and blockchain are massively, massively complex. And I know a decent amount about it, but I am by no means an expert. And if you hear anything that I say in this talk that is incorrect or you think is incorrect, do not hesitate to call me out in the middle of the talk. You're not going to embarrass me or anything like that. I don't want to spread any kind of misinformation. This is actually really hard stuff, so I'm going to do my very, very best. So let's get into it. On August 26th, there was this guy named Martin Shkreli, and he bought the Wu-Tang Clan, exclusive Wu-Tang Clan album for $2 million. Nobody knew it at the time because he was like an anonymous guy, but he did it. He bought the Wu-Tang Clan had been recording an album in secret for like 5 years or something like that, and he bought it exclusively for $2 million. Then on February 11th, 2016, that same guy tweets at Kanye West, and he's trying to buy Kanye West's new album that has yet to come out, The Life of Pablo. And he's trying to buy it from him, and he's trying to give him $10 million and have Kanye West only give him exclusive rights to that album, or so he says. 3 days later, Martin Shkreli claims to have a bunch of money stolen. He tweets, quote, "Who the fuck has my $15 million? I need my money back. This isn't a fucking joke. WTF. Someone named Daquan said he was Kanye's boy, and I signed the deal to buy Palbo and sent the Bitcoin. Call the police. This is bullshit." So I saw this, and I knew just enough about Bitcoin to know, like, I might actually be able to get to the bottom of this. So I had a question. I was basically like, well, $15 million is a ton of money. The Bitcoin, I know just enough about Bitcoin to know that Bitcoin records all transactions that happen on a distributed ledger. The ledger is publicly available. It's not encrypted. It's available to anyone. It's actually distributed to everybody in the Bitcoin network. So I want to replicate the ledger. I want to get the ledger, and I want to search it, and I'm going to see if I can find this $15 million transaction that Mr. Shkreli was referring to. So basically, given a date range, find transactions that fall in a certain USD value range. Find all transactions that fall in a USD value range. And actually, before I go on, if I want to switch this to like multi-monitor view, can I do that? Because I can't see presenter mode. Sorry folks. I just do. If not, I can just keep going. It's actually not a big deal. Yeah, let me just keep going. I thought maybe it would just like pop over. Oh my god. Oh, it was all my fault. Thank you. No worries. It was all my fault. All right, back on track. So, is it possible to find this transaction? So, my approach is basically, I'm going to get the ledger somehow. I'm going to parse it all out, parse all of the transactions. I need to get it into a consumable format of some kind. I'm going to shove it into a database, and I'm going to write some queries. I'm going to ask the database a couple questions, and then I'm going to review the results, and that's it. So let's see if we can get to the bottom of this. This is basically like the pseudo query that I'm thinking in my head, right? Given all Bitcoin transactions ever, select star from all Bitcoin transactions ever where the date is in between, I don't know, February 10th and February 14th, 4 days leading up to it, and the US dollar equivalent of the Bitcoin transaction at the time is somewhere between 14 and $16 million. So, now I'm going to talk a lot about Bitcoin. Raise your hand if you're familiar with Bitcoin. All right, raise your hand if you know how Bitcoin works. Okay, yeah, everyone's like, okay. Bitcoin is actually really complicated. I cannot possibly word it any better than some random guy I saw on a forum who just said, on a forum post, some guy wrote, "Hey, can you explain like something about Bitcoin?" And this other guy responds, "Bitcoin is not something you can sit down and understand in a couple of hours." That guy was absolutely correct. Bitcoin is actually really complicated. So, Bitcoin is a cryptocurrency. It is a peer-to-peer cryptocurrency. As far as I know, it is the first cryptocurrency that I have ever known. There may have been other cryptocurrencies, but it was certainly the first big one. There is no central authority, which means there is no trusted third party. What does that mean? What is a trusted third party? Well, if you send somebody $20 on PayPal to buy a pair of shoes, and you receive the shoes in the mail, and you open up the box, and there's a dead rat in the box, you're going to be like, "What? Where are my shoes?" And you're going to open a ticket with PayPal, and they're going to say, "Ah, I got you," and they're going to reverse the transaction so you're going to get your money back, because that's a trusted third party, right? But if you have $20 and you go up to somebody and you give it to them to buy a pair of shoes in person, and then they punch you in the face and they run away, you can't like contact the U.S. Mint to get them to invalidate. Can you guys just invalidate the serial number on that $20 bill that I just gave that guy? No, you can't do that. There isn't a trusted third party in cash transactions. There's nobody that oversees it. Likewise, with Bitcoin, there is no trusted third party. When you send somebody Bitcoin, you can't unsend the Bitcoin. No one can reverse the transaction. It's cryptographically infeasible. Think of it as cache of the internet, right? It uses known cryptographically secure protocols to ensure the integrity of the transactions. It uses a distributed blockchain ledger to record all transactions, as I was talking about earlier. It uses something called a proof of work to prevent double spending. Double spending is basically just having a Bitcoin and spending it and then turning right back around and spending it again to somebody else. Well, you can't do that because once you've spent a Bitcoin, then you're basically, in order to double spend a Bitcoin, you would have to do all of this, you would have to crunch all of the CPU cycles that everybody else in the world crunched in order to get to that coin in the first place. So you'd have to compute all these very, very heavy computational transactions. It would take years and years and years to be able to fake a Bitcoin transaction. It's cryptographically infeasible. I'll get a little bit more into that later. Oh, and by the way, a proof of work is basically just something that is difficult to achieve the first time, but it's easy to validate. So basically what that means is if you give me like, if you say, hey Andrew, is this word in the dictionary? And you give me a word, and it's going to take me a really, really long time. For example, if the word is in the dictionary, and the dictionary isn't in any kind of order, it's just a big list of words, it's going to take me a really long time to find it. But then if I said, yes it is, after I found it after 10 minutes, I found it, it's on page 24. And then you'd say, oh, okay, and then it's really easy for you to just open up to page 24 and find the word. So it's hard to do the first time, but it's easy to validate that the thing is correct. Everything is auditable and accountable back to the Genesis block or whichever block it was mined from. You can trace every single Bitcoin all the way back to the Genesis block or to a Coinbase. Coins are mined basically by crunching CPU and by calculating doing hard cryptographic equations, kind of like mining gold out of a mountain. Bitcoin uses a non-Turing complete Bitcoin-specific scripting language to validate transactions. As if it wasn't complicated enough, they have their own programming language. It takes approximately 10 to 15 minutes to validate a Bitcoin transaction. If you want to know more, then I recommend you read the Bitcoin paper. When you send somebody Bitcoin, you're not actually sending them a Bitcoin. What you're doing is you're signing the coin value to a recipient in a way that allows them to be the next person that spends the Bitcoin. So what that means is when you send somebody Bitcoin, I'm not losing an amount and they're not getting an amount. There's no state. All that's happening is I'm basically just saying, somebody at some point told me that I was the next person that was going to be able to sign a Bitcoin, and then I'm signing it over. I'm saying, all right, now you are the next person that gets to sign the Bitcoin. And that's basically, you're the next person who gets to spin it, and it's a chain. It forms a chain. The transaction is broadcast to the entire world, to the rest of the Bitcoin network, and only the recipient can spend the Bitcoin. All transactions are known by everybody, inherently. The network actually self-regulates with something called difficulty. Difficulty is a notion that where the more people that are a part of the Bitcoin network at any given time, the harder the cryptographic equations, the proof of work is to achieve to generate the next block. So what that means is if there's 10 people mining Bitcoin, then the proof of work or the thing that the math or the crypto that has to be done is going to be kind of hard, and it's going to take those 10 people about 10 minutes to do it. And then if 1,000 people all of a sudden join the Bitcoin network, it's going to make the math a lot harder. It's going to add a lot more difficulty because there's so many people mining Bitcoin. It wants to regulate so that new blocks are harvested once every 10 to 15 minutes. And the dollar value fluctuates with Bitcoin as it does with any currency. That's not a Bitcoin thing. That's just an economics thing. That's how economics works. And to get into a little bit, the way the Bitcoin price is actually determined, I'm not an economist, but the way the price of Bitcoin is determined is basically by currency traders who just say, this is how much cash I'm willing to spend on your 100 Bitcoin, or something like that. Is Bitcoin anonymous? Kind of. Everybody knows about every single transaction, so in that way, it's less anonymous than cash, but you don't know who the wallet belongs to in real life. So in that way, it's more anonymous than cash. One person can use lots and lots of wallets. It's actually best practice to use one wallet per transaction. That's what like the the super hardcore Bitcoin people say. Bitcoin can be mixed and tumbled to make it harder to trace, which basically just means shifted around to a bunch of different wallets and then going to where you ultimately want it to go to. I'm sure there are legitimate reasons why Bitcoin should be mixed. I don't know what any of them are, but I'm sure they exist. And wallets can be created offline without any internet access to receive Bitcoin. Not to create Bitcoin, but to receive Bitcoin. Which means I can have a computer that is not connected to the internet. I can generate a wallet. I can generate a Bitcoin wallet. I can take that public key, I can write it down, and I can go and I can tell somebody, hey, send this wallet a bunch of Bitcoin. And then they can send that wallet Bitcoin, and then I can claim that Bitcoin whenever I want. But you can't spend Bitcoin unless you are attached to the internet. But people can send as much money they want to a wallet that you specify, because remember, you're the only one who has the ability to sign it off to somebody else. Is Bitcoin secure? I mean, I want to say yes. Like, the cryptographic protocols are very, very secure. The implementation is genius. If you read the Bitcoin paper, it's actually, I mean, it's brilliant. The guy thought, or the people thought of everything. There are attacks against Bitcoin. They're unlikely, but they're not impossible. The biggest one is something called a 51% attack, which is just when 51% or more of the Bitcoin network, of the blockchain network, collude together to make something bad happen, like to change something that happened in the past, or to do something, this, that, or the other. But it's very cryptographically infeasible. I mean, obviously, if you do have 51% of people that are willing to do that, then that's fine. But one of the defenses against the, quote, 51% attack is that if you have 51% of the members of the Bitcoin network, you're going to make more money just working for the network than you are trying to change something that had happened in the past, most likely, because of the way proof of work works. Most of the attacks just affect having shitty OPSEC, and that's it. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the blockchain. Raise your hand if you know what blockchain is. All right. Raise your hand if you know how blockchain works. Yeah, okay, yep. That's about me too. Blockchain 101. Blockchain is a list of every single transaction ever. It is a giant series of linked lists in the form of serialized data. It is an eternally growing list of transactions. And basically, it's a big, I mean, depending on what you mean when you say what is the ledger, I mean, or the blockchain is the technology, then it uses a ledger, a distributed ledger. The ledger is always the same. It's the same everywhere. It always grows in the same way. Also, as a side note, if anybody does something, like if I'm hosting a ledger and I'm mining Bitcoin and I make a change, and I tell somebody else about the change, like if two people mine the same Bitcoin at the same time, then what happens is, we both add that onto our ledger and everyone's like replicating from us, then whoever it is that mines the next Bitcoin, whoever they trusted is the one that moves forward, and the other person just loses their Bitcoin. So that's how it works. It's the longest chain of trusted stuff. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. Computers are incentivized to host the full blockchain ledger and keeping everything going by getting rewarded for mining Bitcoin, by receiving Bitcoin for mining Bitcoin. Basically, if you are mining your proof of work, if you are part of the Bitcoin ledger and you are part of the Bitcoin network, and you are mining Bitcoin, then there's a chance that you will achieve the Coinbase, you will achieve the proof of work, create the newest block, and you will receive a number of Bitcoin. There was just something called the Bitcoin halving, so I think until recently you would receive 25 Bitcoin. Now you receive 12. I think. Is that right? 12 and a half. Oh, that makes sense. Math. And that was, I mean, there was a time when Bitcoin was worth $1,000 a pop. Right now it's floating at around like 500, 600, I think. Yeah, so it's floating around 600. So I mean, man, 12 Bitcoin, 600-ish bucks pop, that's a lot. So nothing in the past that's ever happened in the blockchain can ever be changed. It is hashed on hashed on hashed on hashed. So if one thing changes, then everything else subsequently is going to be invalidated. There's no state to the blockchain necessarily. It's a chain. It's a log of activity. The blockchain is made up of blocks. Blocks are made up of transactions. Transactions are made up of inputs and outputs. An output is a wallet sending coins to another wallet, kind of. What an output is it's kind of like I was telling you before. An output is me saying, I take this amount of Bitcoin and I'm signing it to your wallet. You are the person who is allowed to spend it next. An input is somebody else saying, I acknowledge that you just sent me those Bitcoins. I claim them. I'm claiming those coins. And then they would turn around and output them to someone else, right? So every input, every time someone claims Bitcoin, they're going to reference the output that they got the Bitcoin from. So anytime I say, all right, I'm ready to spend my Bitcoin, part of the data here is for me to reference the output that I got it from. And likewise, the output that I got it from before did the same thing. And it forms this giant linked list. An output without a corresponding input just means that the coins have not been spent. So if you're looking at the blockchain ledger and you find an output and there's no input with a previous hash value pointing to it, that means that those coins haven't been spent. They're just hanging out. So if you want to access the blockchain like a total noob, what you can do is you can go to blockchain.info. I'm just kidding. This is how everybody accesses the blockchain. You can go to a blockchain explorer. There's a lot of free ones. Blockchain.info, webbtc.com. I've got a big list of them right here. There's a ton of these. I mean, there's like 50 of these websites that you can use to like click through the blockchain, click through Bitcoin transactions, stuff like that. There are tons of them. One really cool one, it's called ABE, which I think stands for a blockchain explorer. And that's an actual offline one. So you feed it the raw serialized blockchain data, and it will actually build your own offline blockchain explorer. It's a pain in the ass to get set up, but I have a solution to that, which I will talk about shortly. This is what blockchain.info looks like. If you've never been there before, it's a great website. Basically, this is the height. So that just means that's which block it is. The block height is what block number it is. The first ever block, the Genesis block, was block number 1. Had a height of 1. The next block had a height of 2. This is how old the block is when the block was mined. This is how many transactions took place inside of that block. This is the total amount of USD value in all of the transactions that took place in that block. This is the relayed by field, which is basically like whoever advertises that they were the ones that mined that block. So if they have there's like a mining pool or something like that, announcing it to the world once they've mined it. And then this is the actual data size of the block, the data size of the serialized data that's sitting on the ledger of the block. If you want to actually access an address, the page is going to look like this. You're going to get a QR code. Blockchain.info does some really fun stuff for you. I mean, it converts however much money the wallet has received, how much it's sent, all the transactions that it's had, etc. This is what a transaction looks like. A Bitcoin transaction has something called a TX ID, or a transaction ID, which is just a UUID, a unique identifier for any transaction that's ever happened. But that's like super 2015. And there's no way to do the thing that I want to do, which is show me all the transactions above a certain dollar value in this time range. Well, you can't ask Bitcoin blockchain.info that because it doesn't have any way to tell you. Those APIs aren't exposed. It has the data, but it doesn't give it to you in that way. So you just have to go around and click stuff, which isn't how I wanted to do things at all. So also maybe you don't want somebody to have logs of questions that you're asking, and I'm aware of this. So to reiterate, this is the actual transaction that I want to make. I want to say, show me all of the transactions that happened in a given date range that fell under a certain USD equivalent range at that time. There are some cheat codes to do this. I mean, there are easier ways to do it than how I did it, but I didn't really realize it at the time. You can download a dump of webbtc.com's Postgres database, which is about 80 gigs compressed. When you decompress it, it's about 160 gigs. It's a giant Postgres database, so you can get it from there. The other thing is you can generate the database yourself with ABE, which is a blockchain explorer. As I was saying before, it's an offline blockchain explorer. This, I found a guy that Dockerized it and made it way, way easier. If you're familiar with Docker, you can literally kick off the whole thing with one command. It's amazing. That command that I have written here is literally, you just type that command with the serialized blockchain ledger data, and it'll rip everything apart for you. It will take forever. It will take a very long time, and it will take up a lot of space, but if you're not worried about time and you're not worried about space, then that's the way to go. And that's the interface right there. Basically, it's very similar, like a stripped down blockchain.info. So, how are we going to pull the ledger apart? Well, the ledger is made up of DAT files. there is currently about 125 megabyte .dat files. They're named as such, blk0000000.dat, followed by blk0000001.dat. And each DAT file is a serialized binary blob containing about 128 containing exactly 128 megabytes of blockchain ledger data. Each file contains blocks. Each block contains transaction. Each block contains a header and transactions, and each transaction contains inputs and outputs. The data structure is complex, but only if you don't know anything about data structures, which I did not before I started doing this. This is my military grade PowerPoint skills of like wrapping what the blockchain, what the actual block, what a block looks like. You got the block header wrapping around transactions with an input and output section, and there are itemized inputs and outputs in each of those. And then, like I said, there's blocks on blocks on blocks on blocks. So how do you actually get the ledger? How do you get the data? Well, there's a number of different ways. The right way to do it is to install Bitcoin Core on a server, like spin up a DigitalOcean node for 3 days, ensure that you have about 100-ish gigabytes free of disk space, and then you just replicate the ledger over a couple of days. You're just pulling it in from everybody else. You're building the ledger. And after I want to say it depends on your internet connection, but it doesn't really, because it takes time to build the ledger together. It takes time to pull it down. It's not going to be throttling it. It's not like it's just going to be flying in. So it takes longer. It's going to take, it took me, I think the first time I did it, 4 days to build the ledger. And it was on a really fast internet connection. When I did this in July 2016, it was about 80 gigs. It's been growing like a mofo though recently, so it's going to be pretty big. If you want to get it the fast and lazy way, then you can download a torrent of the ledger files. If you want, I haven't actually uploaded this, but if anybody wants it, just get in contact with me and I'll upload a torrent file. You can seed it and we'll do it like that. I've seen a few of these hovering around the internet, and when you do this, the good thing is you don't have to worry about anybody doing any putting any bullshit on the ledger, because if you're trying to download it and then load it into Bitcoin Core to validate, it won't load if the ledger data, if there's anything that's screwed up in it. It'll error out, nothing will validate, it won't work. So you can get the ledger if you find a torrent. There's very low risk of it being tampered with unless you don't validate it. This is what it looks like. This is the ledger. Just a bunch of hex. This is a hex dump of the ledger. So it's actually, it's binary, it's serialized data, but this is a hex dump of the ledger. And I looked at that and I was like, okay, I don't know what to do with this, but the answers are in here somewhere. So then I'm like, I gotta rip the whole thing apart, which means I have to learn how to use structs, which presumably you learn in computer science and stuff, but I wasn't fortunate enough to do that. So, I started out by mapping it out by reading the Bitcoin developer documentation and mapping out the data, the fields, and then that is a map that I wrote in Vim. And I was just going through and mapping it out. I had a key and all this kind of stuff. Not the right way to do it. Parsing blockchain sucks. So I did start writing a parser via this guy's guide. This is a great guide. Tom Gebhar wrote it. I don't know who that is. I've chatted with him a couple of times, but I've met him. But if he hadn't have written that guide, I would have been so lost. I started writing my thing following his guide, but it wasn't exactly what I needed it to be, but I did reference it a number of times. So he really, really helped me out with this. I found a couple of libraries that did close to what I needed, but not exactly what I needed. And then I found Pi Blockchain, which was committed to GitHub literally several weeks before I started doing this project. So I was like, thank God. So I used that. It did exactly what I needed to, or almost exactly what I needed to. Also, shout out to this guy Xenor987 who wrote a tool called Block Parser, which is written in C++. He wrote it in 2011. It worked great when the ledger was 1 gigabyte, but the ledger's 80 now. So it was loading everything into RAM and doing something, and you can't really do that with 80 gigabytes. So these are the things that I need for the sake of my use case, right? I want to do this big SQL query, so I got to rip everything apart. I need a transaction ID just so I can reference everything with something else. I need a payer wallet, a receiver wallet, the time of the transaction, the Bitcoin value, and the USD value. There's a lot of problems with this. There's a lot of problems with all these things. For example, transactions aren't just a plus and a minus number. It's a giant linked list of inputs and outputs. So you can't it's more complicated than that. I think I'd touch on that a little bit more. There's a notion of change in Bitcoin, which is basically, I think I touch on it in a different slide. The payer isn't something that is specified in the Bitcoin ledger. Only the receiver and a reference to the output that the person, whoever had the Bitcoin first. So basically, like, everything needs to be linked together to get the payer. I dig into that a little bit more. The exchange rate, right? There is no USD value piece of, like, in the blockchain ledger. There's no field in the block header that says, like, this is how much US dollars Bitcoin is worth today. Like, no. So I have to derive that myself somewhere else. Big data, like, not really. You know, it's like 80-ish gigabytes. When I ripped everything apart into, like, text, it got a little bit bigger, but it's not, like, big. But it was big for, like, my home computer. And in transaction patterns, this was a huge pain in the ass. This is basically, as Bitcoin has evolved, when a private key is being validated by the Bitcoin script programming language inside the actual Bitcoin client, anytime a transaction is being validated, or anytime a transaction is being pushed to the ledger, there are different patterns of pushing a public key and validating it with, like, different opcodes. And it's not one standard. There are slightly different implementations. Huge pain in the ass. Transaction ID. So remember, this is the first thing that I need to get. Transaction ID is actually super easy. It's just a SHA-256 of the entire transaction. Bam. That's it. That's not that hard, right? The next thing is time. Time is actually also really easy. There is an epoch timestamp located in the block header. All I had to do is just convert that to datetime. Well, I didn't even have to convert that to datetime, but I put that in the database as a Unix epoch timestamp. It's right there. Super easy. The receiver wallet is kind of hard. Like I said, wallets and addresses are shorthand for a public key. So what it actually is wallets are a public key, SHA-256, and then SHA-256 again, and then chopped apart, and then rearranged in certain ways, and salted with themselves, and appended with, like, a version ID, I think. So the data that's actually on the ledger is not the same as the wallet that you'd see on, like, a website. And you have to do some work to actually get it. Bitcoin script pushes the private key data to, like, a stack, and then it does, like, it sends the validation opcode, and, like, that's how it does stuff. Bitcoin script is really similar to the programming language Forth, if you're familiar with Forth. Me neither. This is where script will be. Script is part of the output. It's the data section of the output. Think of it as the data section of the output. Like I said, there are lots of different script opcode patterns. There's about, like, really 99.99% of transactions in the blockchain are going to fall under about 6 different patterns. The library that I'm using to parse the blockchain, Pi blockchain, the guy, bless his heart, but he only implemented 1 pattern. So I was like, okay, and it was because, I mean, like I said, he had literally committed this thing to GitHub like a week before. So I know he's, like, implementing more, and I chatted with him a little bit. But he only implemented 1 pattern, so he would have really only gotten, like, 10% coverage on all the transactions. So I ended up having to actually crack open the source code and write, and, like, basically fork the library and write a couple. I ended up writing 2 more patterns into it, like the ability to recognize 2 more patterns. And so with 3 of the 6 patterns, you end up getting 99.5% coverage. I am missing data, so when I did crunch through everything, I got 99.5% coverage of the entire blockchain of all transactions. I am missing data, but unfortunately everyone's just going to have to deal with it. And I didn't do anything. There's also multi-signature transactions, which I didn't even try to screw with because that's just too hard for me, or it was at the time. The change problem that I was talking about before. So I have a Bitcoin wallet with 20 Bitcoin in it, and I want to send 5 Bitcoin to Kanye West. So what I'm going to actually do is I'm going to cryptographically sign 5 Bitcoin to Kanye West's public key, which is, well, to Kanye West's address, which is just a different form of a public key. And then I'm going to cryptographically sign 15 of those Bitcoin to my own public key, or to a different public key if I want to be even sneakier and have the private keys for both those, right? So, like I said, there's no state, there's no like transaction. When you make a Bitcoin transaction, it's not like -5 me plus 5u. It's that I'm going to chop it apart, and then I'm going to say I'm giving myself the next one, because everything is a linked list of linked lists, right? If you're only looking at the outputs, if you don't have the inputs, then change transactions and non-change transactions are indistinguishable. There's no way to know the difference. So you need the outputs to figure, or you need the inputs to figure that out. You need the entire chain to solve this, right? Because you need all the inputs if you're going to be have a decent look at the outputs. And like I said, if I have, because of this problem that I'm talking about right now, if I have $100 million worth of Bitcoin and I buy a copy for $5, if you're just looking at the outputs on the ledger, it's going to look like I'm sending somebody $5 and somebody else is receiving 999,990, whatever, like a ton of money, right? But they're not. The sender problem. So this is the sender wallet. This is not in the blockchain. This is not in the ledger. There is no sender field. You have to derive it. It sucks. You have to actually derive it by taking the sender wallet, or the receiving wallet, of the output that the input is referencing in its previous hash field. And it sucks, because everything is a chain, so that's how you have to derive this whole thing. My coworker, Chris Donaher, wrote this giant, big bastard of a SQL query that actually made all those connections for me. But I realized in retrospect, I probably should have used a graph database for this. I definitely should have used a graph database for this, but I didn't really realize it at the time. When I did that giant SQL query to link everything together, or when my coworker did rather, I straight up didn't have enough RAM in my machine to build the view table for that. So I overnighted 32 gigabytes of RAM to my house, and put it in my computer and it still didn't work. It was the dumbest $200 I've ever spent in my entire life. But so basically I did everything, and I just didn't, my South Carolina internet sucked too much, so I ended up having to my roommate ended up taking me to his office that had gigabit fiber, and I uploaded my whole data set, I compressed it, and I uploaded it to S3, and I rented this giant AWS server that had 300 gigabytes of RAM that cost $8 every hour, and I was I was screaming, I was typing everything in because it was costing me it's $8 an hour, and I'm this has to go as fast as humanly possible. So anyways, I did it, I made the query, I linked everything together, and then I just ripped out the database and pulled it back down. And then the amount field, I was talking before, the amount of Bitcoin. The amount of Bitcoin in a transaction isn't actually in the blockchain, isn't in the outputs. It's in Satoshis. It's not in it's not in Bitcoin, it's in Satoshis. There's 100 million Satoshis to a Bitcoin. That's all you need to know. And it's here in the outputs. Then the next thing, which was a little bit of a pain in the ass, was the historical USD exchange rate. Like I was saying, Bitcoin, the price of Bitcoin is not anywhere in the blockchain ledger. It's actually going to be derived. It's however much money people are willing to pay for it at the time. That's what determines the market value. Given I needed to have a function that basically I wrote a function that, given an epoch timestamp, give me the Bitcoin to USD value at that time. Convert it to a date, rip that out of some data source, and then I yanked down the market, basically the historical USD pricing data for Bitcoin off of blockchain.info at this link. So given Satoshis, multiply that by 100 million, multiply that by however much Bitcoin was worth at that time, and there you've got it. And then that was it. That was everything. So I ended up with this big list. It was like a CSV, and you'll see here you can't really see it, but all the USD values 0, because that was in 2009 when no one would have spent anything for Bitcoin, right when it came out. This is actually just the outputs, but I'll go in here more. My parser source code is on my GitHub. My GitHub the repo is still private. I need to unprivate it. I'm going to do that any day now, I promise. If you want it in between now and when I unprivate it, just email me, or tweet at me or whatever, and I'll send it to you. It's in Python 3.5. It uses Python 3.5. It won't work with Python 3.4. It certainly won't work with Python 2.7. It's slow. I tried doing the multi-threading. It kind of worked, kind of didn't, because I don't know multi-threading, because I'm not a good programmer. So then I needed to load everything into a DBMS. I decided to use something called ClickHouse by Yandex. Yandex is the Russian search engine. Why? Well, because one of my coworkers recommended that I do it like that. And he's smarter than me, and he was right. It's awesome. It uses something called views. A view, like a database view, is basically just the output of another query being treated as a table. So basically, I linked everything together with a view, exported it, and it was basically like a table that was just the output of another more complex query. The only downside of ClickHouse is that it can't make queries that don't fit into RAM. So then I had it. I had about 100 gig plain text CSV. It took 13 hours to parse out, and it took 15 minutes to load into the database. This is what loading the inputs and the outputs look like. Then I had to link it together. This was the thing that I was talking about before. This is the thing that I told you about. I actually ended up going to my roommate's office, spinning up a giant AWS server, etc., etc. This is the SQL query. That's one query. So it was huge to link everything together. My coworker Chris Donaher wrote that because he's the man. This is the output of it in ClickHouse. So this is when it actually rips everything apart. I've got TXID, payer, payee, Satoshi amount, epoch timestamp, USD amount, and then like a date format. So I had it. Had it in a database. Oh, thank you. Had it in a database. I'm going to blow through the next ones because I'm a little short on time. This is what it looked like. 1.4 billion records. So how many transactions do you think there were? Oh, yes. Okay. How many transactions do you think there were that are over $1 million of Bitcoin? Because I have the USD value, over $1 million transactions. Just take a guess. 50,000 is insanely close. 60,000. 60,000 transactions over $1 million. 404 transactions over $10 million. And, I'm sorry, 414. Thank you. And 7 transactions that were over $100 million over time with Bitcoin. Biggest US dollar transfers of all time. I mapped this out and graphed it a little bit. The biggest one ever was $147 million on November 22nd, 2013. Somebody wrote an article about it. It was so big. And the article was literally titled, "A Shitload of Money Moves in One Bitcoin Transaction." That is what the title of the article was. There were $140 million, there have been 140 million Bitcoin transactions. Largest unredeemed Bitcoin transaction. This is a $34 million transaction that has been unclaimed for 2 years. It's just sitting there. I've got other stuff like the days that the most oh, yes. That is current value. Yep. So it is now worth $34 million, and it was traded 2 years ago. I'm sorry? Oh, because Bitcoin was about twice as much then? Yeah. Days where the most US dollars were traded. On January 24th, 2016, $27 trillion of Bitcoin were traded. The day before, $11 trillion of Bitcoin were traded. The day before, March 5th, 2016, $7 trillion were moved. I didn't actually finish the slide, and I forgot to, I'm sorry, but you can look at things like how much money has been donated to, like, WikiLeaks, the Pirate Bay. WikiLeaks got $125,000 on one of their Bitcoin wallets. The Pirate Bay got $3,000. I thought that was funny at first. I was like, the Pirate Bay probably would have gotten more, but then I remembered the people that go to the Pirate Bay, they're kind of cheap. So that kind of makes sense. A lot of other questions were things like, what are the average amount of transactions per month? These are just different things that you can ask that I haven't gotten up to writing queries for yet. And finally, who the fuck has my $15 million Bitcoin? So let's go back. I basically wrote this big giant query that said, show me all of the transactions, show me the biggest transactions that happened in the month of February. That was what I did. There were none. There were no transactions. There were no one single transactions that were $15 million in February. I found an $8 million transaction that happened 4 days before the tweet, and it actually looks like it went into a Tumblr the day that Martin Shkreli sent the tweet to Kanye West. But I don't know that it has anything to do with him. That's just the closest thing that I could find. It was worth $8 million at the time, right? This is it, like, being ripped apart, being split in half, like a bunch of times, going into a wallet, and then it continues to do that if you actually browse this transaction. If you guys want to check this transaction down, highly recommend it, and just click through and make your own decisions. It's in the Pastebin thing. What if the transaction was split into multiple smaller transactions, right? What if the guy was tricked into sending his Bitcoin in 10 different transactions? So show me the wallets that received the most money total in the month of February, right? Oh, I've got 1 minute. I didn't find any. All of the ones that I found were basically they were all high cash flow wallets that had money coming in, money going out for a year or so. So I don't think any of them were this. I did find a $12 million transaction 2 days after the tweet, which was here, and then it was claimed about 5 months later. Future work. I want to open a public website, blah, 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 build a front end, make my parser code suck less, watch everyone like, watch what people do with donation money, build an API, build an alerting engine, blah, blah, blah. Law enforcement could use this, intelligence community could use this, fintech could use this, there's anti-money laundering use cases, investment use cases for hedge funds. There's some evil uses in here. You can use it as a targeting platform to find rich people and steal their money. You violate people's privacy. I don't know. Blockchain's cool, but it's not formatted to make queries like we want to. So we ripped it apart, put it in a database, asked it a question, and it was awesome. Did anybody move $15 million around the time of the tweet? Not in one transaction. I saw a couple things that were kind of close, but maybe my time range is off. I don't know. Am I de-anonymizing the blockchain by doing this? Because somebody asked me that at some point. My answer is no, because if you use that logic, Google de-anonymized the blockchain by creating a search engine, or de-anonymized the internet by creating a search engine, so that's bullshit. Database can do whatever you want it to. You can make SQL queries against it, answer a bunch of questions, correlate price of Bitcoin with other stuff, etc. That's it. That's my talk. Does anybody have any questions? Yes? The question is, do I have any plans to do it with other cryptocurrencies like Litecoin, etc.? I don't have any plans to do it, but it would be insanely easy to do because really the only thing that differentiates most of those cryptocurrencies is they use a different network identifier, like they have their own thing and they have a different network identifier in the protocol. It would be probably almost the exact same thing with minimal tweaks, but no, I haven't done that yet. But you can. Yep. Yes. The question is, any interest in doing this with side chains or private chains? I don't actually know anything about either of those. I would think private chains have trusted third parties though, don't they? They're like hosted by like a multiple group of people. Yeah, private. I don't, but that's just because I really don't know anything about those. I'm open to it though. Any other questions? Nope. That's it. That's my talk. This is my contact info. Thank you guys for coming to my talk.